So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Melton Women in Sport Virtual Forum. So this is our third year for this event, and it is usually held out at Tabcorp Park over a lovely breakfast. I'd like to acknowledge our project partners who have funded this event, Melton City Council. Your commitment to building an inclusive, safe and welcoming community is a credit to the leadership of all of your staff. My name is Kate Anderson. I work within the Sport, Recreation and Health team at Leisure Networks, and I'm so pleased to be hosting it this morning. As much as I would prefer to be with you all in person at Tabcorp Park today, I do enjoy the fact that most of you are probably at home in your comfies just like me. So this is a passionate topic for me, and I can't wait to see more women and girls getting involved in sport and recreation, both at the participation and leadership level in the future. My colleagues, Michael King and Jessie Drever, will also be supporting today's event by managing our chat function to keep engagement and updates ongoing throughout the morning. Before we start, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owners on the land on which I am presenting from today. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that you are all listening from today. And I wish to pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, just some quick housekeeping. Firstly, if everybody could please keep themselves on mute throughout the event, that would be greatly appreciated. But feel free to think of any questions that you have throughout the presentations and write them into the chat box. For those of you who haven't joined a Microsoft Teams meeting before, the chat function is the speech bubble you will see either on your toolbar or in the top corner of your screen. We will have our staff and our speakers available on the chat function throughout to endeavour to answer these questions for you. If you don't have access to the chat function, don't worry too much, as it sometimes occurs, but we'd be happy for you to email through any questions and we'll be sure to get back with those answers. So just feel free to sit back and relax. Finally, don't worry about missing any of the content, whether it is from our speakers or the chat function, as we are recording the session and we'll be sending you a copy of the recording and the questions and answers at the end of the day. Now, I'm very happy to welcome our guests of council who are here with us this morning. We have the Mayor, Councillor Maidlick, Councillor Ramsey, Councillor Carley, Councillor Vandenberg, Councillor Bob Turner, and Councillor Julie Shannon. So welcome everybody. And I'd now love to hand over to the Melton City Council Mayor, Councillor Maidlick, to open up proceedings.
Thank you, Kate. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we come together today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I would also like to welcome members of our growing and diverse community and acknowledge the strength and wealth of experience you bring to our great city. I would also like to acknowledge my fellow councillors, Councillor Sophie Ramsey, Councillor Julie Shannon, Councillor Bob Turner, Councillor Ashley Vandenberg, and we do have an apology from Councillor Lara Carley. I'd also like to acknowledge members of Council's executive team and our special guest speakers, Rana Hussein, board member of the Victorian Women's Trust Steering Committee, Cricket Australia, and Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Richmond Football Club. Clare Hanlon, Professor at the Susan Alberti Women in Sport Chair, and board member of Gymnastics Victoria, and Ash Brazill, dual code athlete of the Australian Netball representative and Collingwood AFL player. I'd also like to thank the recreation team for their great work in organising this morning's event. And we do wish that we were all together enjoying our breakfast, but I think this is as good as it's going to get during COVID pandemic, and hopefully next year we'll be all together again enjoying our morning breakfast together at this fantastic event. It does give me great pleasure this morning to celebrate and encourage the role in women in sport. The City of Melton has come a long way in promoting female sports participation with new and upgraded sporting facilities that include female-friendly change spaces and inclusive community spaces. But there is a lot of room for growth and development, which is really exciting. The speakers you'll hear this morning will share their stories of success, as well as the challenges that have been or are yet to have been overcome to reach gender equality in their sporting code. Through their example and work, we're seeing increased and improved visibility of women involved in sport in terms of representation in the media, equal workplace conditions, and access to leadership and mentoring opportunities. This is not only important to an Australian women, but specifically for women in the city of Melton. One of the central things we can do for our diverse and inclusive community is give all women, young or old, from any background and with any experience, opportunities to participate in sport. Our recreation team has been part of an exciting project to undertake an industry-leading study in women and girls' participation in sport and active recreation in the Western region, along with partners from Bringbank, Hobsons Bay, Maribyrnong, Moonee Valley, Melbourne, and Wyndham City Councils, Women's Health West, and the Victorian Government. The result is called Women's Participation in Sport and Recreation in Melbourne's West Action Plan for Change 2020-2025 has been developed. This action plan aligns with a number of objectives in our current council and wellbeing plan, and with actions identified in council's Equality and Respect 2030 strategy. It will enable partners to initiate change to address disparity in women's participation in sport, build on the work already achieved in this field, and target further change that is tailored specifically for our local communities and region. By encouraging those around us to take part, share skills and ideas, we build stronger, more connected and resilient neighbourhoods. We know that sport is a key component in strengthening our community, and we want to encourage all women to become more involved and engaged. This includes roles behind the scenes, such as running fundraising events, right through to pulling on a pair of footy boots or stepping up to lead a club or team to long-term sustainable growth. Women are vital to the success of our local sporting codes and to the connectedness of our wider community, and I hope this event will inspire and encourage you all to participate and leave your mark on our sporting community. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the the morning's event.
Thank you, Maya. That was lovely. Now, today is an amazing chance to hear from some incredible speakers within the sport, university, and community industries, with our theme being awareness into action, which to me is all about transitioning our previous discussions and learnings into some action. So we've had events, we've had campaigns such as This Girl Can, and we've had workshops that have created some amazing discussions within this space. But now we want to ensure we turn those, along with the data, into action in our clubs. So what is actually being done and what needs to be done. And today we have some great speakers to help us delve deeper into that. The first of those is Clare Hanlon. Clare is a well-respected professor at Victoria University who also holds the inaugural position of the Susan Alberti Women in Sport Chair that she took to 2 years ago. She is also a current board member of Gymnastics Victoria and uses her positions and incredible knowledge and research to continually support women and girls in sport. Clare has had a hand in influencing many lives through her roles, including some of our own staff at Leisure Networks, and makes a special appearance on the Allen Connect podcast. So we are extremely lucky to hear from her today. So Clare, if you'd like to jump off mute, and we can't wait to hear from you. Thanks.
Many thanks, Kate. And what an honour to be here with a great group of people who are striving to increase the leadership and participation capacity of girls and women in their local sport clubs and wider community. It's good for business. That's why we're doing this. And the purpose of my presentation is to provide you with some facts and insights that you could utilise for your club websites, on your information guides, and also to provide some resources that hopefully will provide you with further insights as to what you can do to create a supportive environment for girls and women in sport. Next slide, please. First of all, girls and women who are leaders and players in sport provide social and economic benefits for the club. This is the why factor, why we need to have it. Women as leaders provide the voice of girls and women on what strategies and practices are needed in order to increase the participation capacity at local sport clubs, and in doing so, increase financial performance. More girls and women in local sport clubs provide social or increase the social responsibility, and the clubs are within them also show that they're socially responsible themselves. Girls and women in particular who are leaders provide good governance and decision making, and more girls and women within a club help to decrease gender-based discrimination and violent supportive attitudes. If we move on from the why factor, then into some facts, because these facts we're going to start looking at women and girls who are players and women and girls who are leaders in sport and why it's important. So let's have a look. Next slide, please. We're going to be focusing on girls and women who are players. Now, these insights that I provide you are great insights and reasons why we should be promoting this on our club websites. Physically active, and this is research that has shown that physically active girls will be healthier, happier, and have higher self-esteem and body confidence, and have better health outcomes in adult life. Girls and women who participate in sports are less likely to take drugs, engage in abusive relationships, or have unwanted pregnancies. Next slide, please. We do have a problem though in Australia, and this comes down to Melton as well and the broader communities. Research in 2000 has shown that globally in Australia, it's ranked one of the worst performers for 11 to 17-year-old girls, with over 90% of girls surveyed reporting insufficient levels of physical activity. Ausplay data has shown that there's a marked decrease in sport participation by girls during the 12 to 14 years of age and those over 17 years. So what can we do about this? As recognised by our councillor earlier, that there has been a first in Australia where 7 councils have got together to create action to enable change. Next slide, please. This is where we celebrate the action plan for change, and the City of Melton being one of those councils that are involved. They appointed Victoria University and Inside Edge, and together what we did was we identified, well, what are the facts around the local council area? What's the voice of girls and women? What do they want to enable them to participate as well as lead in sport? And then how can we then turn these into actions? I'm just going to give you a snapshot of this, and these are available online, the action plan that the council was referring to. But let's start off with some facts about Melton and the local area regarding what girls and women participate in. Next slide, please. What we can see, and I hope it's big enough for you, based on the different councils, and in red you'll note the participation rate for girls and women in the Melton area. What we can see is 56% of girls and women prefer non-organised sport. But what this shows, we've got 4.1% of girls and women that are involved in sport clubs. This shows an incredible opportunity for local sporting communities to embrace girls and women based on their needs, and also turning these into strategies and practices to encourage more girls and women in sport, because we've seen through the previous slides how important it is for girls and women to be involved in sport, but also how good it is for business, for local sport clubs from an economic and social perspective, to have girls and women involved. Next slide, please. So in order to identify, well, how can we get more girls and women involved in the local area, and this includes in Melton, we identify what's the voice and what were the findings from girls and women. 8 key findings came out. First of all, Cost, knowledge awareness about the sport and the local club, time and childcare were important areas. Those in red showed what women felt were barriers in local sport clubs and including active recreation organisations. The green were indicators that helped encourage them to be involved. So if you take a look at, for example, cost, flexible membership is important for women. If you have a look at childcare, for women who are new mothers, for local clubs to provide social programs and social networking sessions are really important for them. Next slide, please. Having a look at the next 4 factors, women as role models, clubs that are unfriendly environments are huge deterrents, safety and transport are key factors. For example, if we look at role models, women that women can see that they can relate to will further encourage them to either participate in the sport from a player perspective or leaders. If we have a look at transport, to be able to advertise on club websites how close public transport is to the club itself further helps with women understanding the accessibility that that club is. Next slide, please. If we now look from a leadership perspective in sport, sport plays a key role in advancing women as leaders. And this again is something that we should be celebrating on our club websites to promote more girls and women into our clubs. First of all, sport and physical activity improves academic and career performance. Research shows that girls who play sport are more likely to graduate from high school, receive postgraduate degrees, and earn more money. Sport also provides and improves the memory, such as discipline and perseverance, and it also improves academic performance. If we have a look at that, it brings us into the next research that shows, and this was by Ernst & Young, that they conducted a global study with 821 women across all sectors, not just in sport. The top executive women, 90% of these women had participated in sport before. And whether that be in school or secondary school or throughout university, but what they believed, the key attributes that sport provided them was the ability to complete projects, the determination, the ability to build teams and motivate those around them. Next slide, please. Research that I conducted with a colleague at another local council involved what were factors attracted and retained women as leaders in sport. Now, what we found were 4 key variables. First of all, women as leaders, and were really interested from an individual perspective. They wanted to be involved in the sporting community. And what we showed here was every point that we identified, clubs could actually embrace these. So in this case, how do you promote that you're providing a sporting community, one that's inclusive for women as leaders, one that keeps women fit, one to help women as leaders learn new skills? When you look at the club membership, these women wanted to develop social contacts. They were influenced by their peers. They also, the standard of leadership and the club management really encouraged and retained these women as leaders in their clubs. The location and the amenities themselves are important. That being the accessibility, the standard of the facilities, also the convenience of the location itself. With the club environment, what attracted and retained the women was that they were family and female friendly. Also, there was support for leaders, there was a social program, and there were leadership opportunities. Next slide, please. It showed that for local sporting clubs, the need to provide 3 key factors: the need for physical, the need for social, and the need for cultural factors. Culturally, for example, we found that women really appreciated that there was job sharing. that meetings, for example, were conducted online rather than having to go in face-to-face all the time. Also, that there were opportunities where scholarships, that's where were accessed from state governments to help advance their leadership skills. Next slide, please. What we can see is, unfortunately, at times also, that women lack confidence, they fear judgment. And this means how important it is for local sport clubs to provide opportunities so that they feel comfortable in their space. The main thing is you can be what you can see. If women see other women who are leaders and they can relate to them, they too will want to be involved. Next slide, please. What I've done is provided a checklist here, and this is only of examples. But what I'd like you to do is when I read through each one, just have a look at yes or no. And again, it's something that hopefully you could incorporate and reflect on regarding your local sport club. Do you have a plan to attract, develop and retain women as leaders in your club? Does your website illustrate the social connection provides for women? Does your strategic plan include a focus on women and girls as leaders in your club? Are the leadership roles in your club flexible? Do you build confidence and leadership skills of girls who can move into senior leadership roles? Do you provide professional development and grow the leadership capacity of women? Is exposure visible of diverse groups of women in a range of leadership roles? Do you promote leadership pathways for girls and women? And do you ask women what needs to happen to encourage them to coach, officiate, be a committee member or team manager? Next slide, please. In addition to the checklist, there's a range of resources out there to help local sport clubs and to create a supportive environment for girls and women and more generally. First of all, the Centre for Multicultural Youth has a fantastic game plan resource kit that's online that you can access. At the very end of the game plan is an action list with a whole series of strategies that are user-friendly for local sport clubs. In addition, there's a resource, and again, you can Google these. One is a level playing field, the case for investing in women's sport. And what this is how you as a local sport club can make a difference to encourage more girls and women as leaders in sport. And there's a cut copy that you can use for your websites. There's another resource, No Boundaries for Women and Girls in Sport and Physical Activity. They're both, first 2 points have been produced by Sport Australia, Victoria University, PricewaterhouseCoopers and the Male Champions of Change, all local through to national sport clubs. The No Boundaries for Women and Girls in Sport and Physical Activity, on the back of this guide, and again Google it, you can see a checklist of what local sport clubs can do to help advance their club and build their capacity to encourage more girls and women as leaders in sport. Finally, next Tuesday will be the launch of Seeing Capability Before Disability Guide. That one is a guide to encourage more sport recreations to encourage women with a disability as leaders into their organisation. Next slide, please. So in summary, what I've provided are some facts to hopefully you can utilise on your and promote on your club website to provide and educate the local community as to why it's important for girls and women to be members in sport. Also regarding strategies has been provided a checklist and resources. There's 2 clear statements that we need to work on and key messages that I'd like to leave you with. First of all, not one size fits all, so we need a range of strategies. And second, you promoting you can be what you can see. And that's so important for women to see that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. It's so interesting to get a bit more insight into the data and the trends and how we as a community can really start to make a positive difference within our clubs. And I think that checklist, for an example, is such a simple way for clubs to check up on their current ability to encourage more women and girls participation. So thank you so much again for that. Now, Don't forget, everybody, feel free to put in any questions into the chat box, and we will try and get to some of those at the end of the session. Then Claire will be able to jump onto the chat function now and hopefully be able to answer some questions for you. Next up today, we are lucky enough to have yet another Leisure Network's podcast guest. One of my personal favourites, I might add, Rana Hussein. Now, Rana is a board member of the Victorian Women's Trust, is on the steering committee of Cricket Australia, and is a diversity inclusion officer at the Richmond Football Club. But I won't hold that against you. I know from listening to her speak before that we are in for some great insights and fantastic stories. So if you can now come off mute, and we can't wait to hear from you. Thanks, Rana.
Thank you. No pressure. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri lands, and I pay my respect to their elders, past and present. Thank you so much for having me. I feel like you're just going to have another 10 minutes of me just saying I agree with what Claire said, because everything she said really resonated to me from my own personal experience. And the data is kind of bang on there. I think it's really funny. Like I still pinch myself that I'm on this panel about women in sport, especially, with an AFLW player that makes me really excited. I'm fangirling a little bit over here. Because if you knew me when I was growing up, if you ask my friends and teachers, who would end up in sport, I would be at the bottom of the list. I was just not sporty at all. Sport was not something that was part of my everyday. I loved watching it. I grew up with cricket, in the background of my childhood, but it was never something I considered was for me. And I certainly, from all angles, was told that in some form or another, from a cultural perspective of, it's, women should probably be a bit demure, to it's not really cool to play sport. When I became a teenager, it's cooler to sit around in a circle and chat and talk about boys, actually. And really, sport was not aimed at me when I was growing up. And so I never saw myself in it. And I sort of admired those girls that were sporty and wished I could be like them, but really didn't consider I could do it. And it was only until I saw Basher Hooley really come to the fore in the AFL that I ever really considered, oh, hang on, we can do this too. And even then, he's a bloke, he's very talented. There was still a barrier, but that was sort of the first time where AFL suddenly became a lot more closer and within reach to me in some form. And so I started to get even more involved and followed him, despite, Essendon wasn't my team. I followed him, everything he did. And then I, started to get involved as a volunteer in the AFL. And I was lucky because I loved the game so much and I just wanted it to be more inclusive. I wanted to see more people like me. But to Claire's point before, that if you can't see it, you really don't assume it's for you. And I would put to, if you haven't had that experience, consider, being the only person of your race in a room, or speaking your language in a room or in a country. That feeling is what it is, really. And it washes over you and you think, it's not even so much a conscious thing. You just kind of go, yeah, okay, that isn't for me. They don't want me there and I don't see myself in it. But I eventually kind of made my way through to Richmond Footy Club, and what I've learned from being there is that sport isn't just on field. There's also so much around sport that is important, and athletes obviously are a key, and for women to be active, it's key, but to have women throughout organisations and throughout sporting clubs is crucial, because until I turn up at Richmond Footy Club, we're not really considering what the Muslim woman's experience with the club is like. They've had Basher there who's illuminating it from his point of view, but they haven't had me there talking about what I experienced. We don't talk, until I get there, we're not tossing around, a Richmond headscarf. We're not talking about Bashahuli girls programming. And I'm not saying that's because I'm amazing. It's literally, you know, sometimes you just need someone in the room to kind of bring an experience, or you can't really ignore me when I'm there. Like, that's the reality of me being there. Before I even open my mouth, people kind of click on to other points of view. And I think that's sometimes the beauty of having lots of different people in a room. And you hope we get to the point where we're beyond that. But it's so important to have women there, because they are just going to bring different things to the table. And it's amazing how many young Muslim women contact me to say, well, how did you do that? And what did you study to get there? And who let you in is kind of the question. Sometimes I ask myself that too, who did let me in? But it's amazing that what representation can do, and how it can galvanize communities. I will say, when I started in sport, I absolutely didn't walk in feeling like I belonged, even though I'd volunteered for about 4 years with the AFL. It took me a while to carve out a space for me, and it wasn't an unwillingness on the club's part. Everybody was doing their best and well-meaning, but there's an internalization of, I don't belong here. So even when people might have been welcoming me with open arms, but the messaging that I'd received over my lifetime meant that I was walking in fearful, timid, and just dying to fit in, and not at all sure whether I would. And so it took me a while to kind of carve out a space where I could be my authentic self in this industry. And I feel like I'm getting there now. And I think that's the key for me when it comes to women and girls and any kind of inclusion programming, really. How do you create a space where the person doesn't have to change who they are to feel like they belong? That they can come as they are, their whole selves, and participate and thrive in the environment. And Claire's presentation really outlined what I feel like, a conversation I feel like I need to keep having in sport, which is that of intersectionality. I think when we talk about women, I find in our industry, it's women in sport sometimes means white, able-bodied women in sport. And I think we really need to be much more clear about who we're talking about, because if we're talking about women, then we need to remember that we are talking about all women. Now, that doesn't mean we have to take on everything all at once. I understand that there are, you know, practicalities around that, but we need to at least hold that in our head, that women, and especially at the local level, come in all different shapes and sizes, and what are the opportunities we're creating for the different types of women. So we have to think about, you know, the different experiences of women, whether they're elderly, whether they're coming from far away, whether they're mothers, whether they're queer, and where we can intervene and have, you know, do the things that feel like are doable, and then maybe give ourselves some stretch goals and targets to really kind of broaden who we're including. How am I going for time? I'm doing all right. I guess, you know, I think to give you an example of how intersectionality plays out for me, there's been no experience of a barrier that I can clearly say is race or clearly say is gender. They're sort of blurred. So whenever I feel like I'm being excluded, there's always that question in my mind of, what is this about? It's never clear. So identity doesn't operate in those silos. You don't experience racism and sexism as one thing or the other. If you're holding both of those identities, you get it both at the same time. So the other day I was at a petrol station, and a man was really upset with me because I had my phone in my hand, and he decided to absolutely berate me, just went off at me, was physically intimidating. He even, you know, took steps towards me. Thank God he kind of caught himself and stopped. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking, this is because I'm a woman or this is because I'm brown. Afterwards, I thought, what was this? And is it both? Is it one or the other? Why did he treat me like that? Is he just a bad guy? And I'll never have the answer to that. But the result of that is me spending the rest of the day contemplating that and adding that to my experience as a person and carrying that around with me and having that seed of fear. And I have to do a lot of thinking around and rationalizing that, no, he was wrong. I'm okay. I'm safe. I didn't deserve to be treated that way. But he probably walked off and didn't think about me again. And I spent the rest of the day processing it and trying to make sure that my life wasn't super impacted by that incident. And so, you know, it's stuff like that I mention that because of just the taxing nature of experiencing barriers and sexism and racism all at once, that it comes as a big thing, a big wave at you that you're just constantly trying to process and you're never fully going to understand it. And so I think as organisations, if we can be on the front foot to minimise that experience for people, to create a safer space as possible, as welcoming a space as possible, you just want people to walk into your club and go, oh, okay, I can just be me here and participate. That's the feeling. And it's such a lovely feeling. So my daughter's just started Junior Blasters, and it's a mixed gendered team. The coach is a woman, and the coach makes a real effort of pronouncing lots of difficult names because there's lots of Indian names that are hard to pronounce. She makes a real effort of doing that, of being inclusive, of inviting us to stay back after training, you know, to have a meal. And I just come to training so joyful and happy and grateful that my daughter's going to have that experience of a local club. And that, I think to myself, that's what we're aiming for. You know, we're all different, but we feel like we can come and enjoy this thing together. And I don't know another environment where that happens. Sport has that power to do that and to really bring people together. And it's I sound really Pollyanna, but I honestly don't know another place where from elite level to local people do come together in that way. So I think we have this beautiful opportunity with sport to really kind of create cohesion in our societies. I guess the other thing I would just say around intersectionality is that I think something that's really helpful for me is that we often are very happy to label identities around queerness, disability, Indigenous. We need to also get comfortable around understanding whiteness, and that whiteness is also an identity, and that people are just that, they're just who they are. So there's no neutral. I think we sometimes think about the world, and particularly in this country, as there's a neutral population and then there are others. And I think if when we do our programming and we think about the people that are engaging in our clubs, we have to kind of break that down a bit, that we're not talking to a neutral population and then another population. We're talking to lots of different communities and really kind of just trying to hone in on what's going to land with them and going after that. I might leave it there because I think I'm on time and there's plenty to get through, but please drop in questions and I'm happy to chat again.
Thank you so much, Rana. I love listening to you. That's why I had my ears glued to the podcast when you were speaking, and this, you know, I've been reminded why. So some fantastic stories, and I found it so interesting to think when you said about you just being around the football club actually makes them think outside the box without having to say anything. So, you know, you can only imagine the benefit of any sporting clubs or recreation clubs or any sort of teams bringing in more women and more cultural backgrounds and, you know, what's more youth or just different perspectives in general. And that could only be a positive moving forward. So thank you so much again. It was from you. And don't want to, as she's just mentioned, throw in some questions into the chat box, and I'm sure Rana will try and get to those for you. Now, finally, to finish up our morning, we will be hearing from dual code athlete Ash Brazill. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, Ash is a very impressive and difficult opponent on the footy field. So she may not have been my direct opponent, thank goodness, but I got front row seats to some of the incredible athleticism she has. Ash is a successful sports person who started out in netball, representing New South Wales, WA, and even Australia, with some great team and personal success. Is both netball and AFLW for the Collingwood Magpies. Thanks, Ash.
Thanks, Kate, and same to you. I don't think we matched up on each other, but I think a few times we got close to each other. I was a bit nervous when you got near me. But I just wanted to say Rana is just amazing, and listening to her, I feel like I've known her a lifetime, which I've never met her. So, Rana, I'd love to catch up one day and have a coffee because you just seem like a beautiful person. And my wife was just listening in and was like, oh, let's meet Rana. Like, so thank you for sharing your story. So a little bit about me. It's really funny when people call me an AFLW athlete because in my mind, I'm just a netballer who's trying to play footy. So I've grown up my whole life playing netball. And just quickly, it was really interesting listening to Rana speak because when she was saying how teachers never thought she'd be into sport and all of this because nationality and things like being a woman and things like that just blew me away. I think I'm really grateful and lucky that I had two parents that were so into sport that my dad used to play mixed netball with my mum. So that's all I saw. So I just thought men played netball, which meant women played footy. It was just, I never questioned anything like that. So for me, growing up, sport was in my family and that's all I wanted to do. I didn't know netball could be a career for me. So in my mind, all I wanted to do was go to the Olympics. So anything that brought sport my way and got a day off school, I'd jump in on that straight away. So I grew up in New South Wales, a little town called Bargo, where, like, I guess, like everyone, the boys played footy, the girls played netball. So netball was a big thing for me. But my school in New South Wales was one of the first schools that played AFL. And for me, I think I was in about year 4, year 5. I didn't even know AFL was a sport. So we grew up watching rugby league, honestly had no idea who even the Sydney Swans were. So I guess playing that sport and learning a completely different game and being able to play with the boys was the highlight for me. So that was year 4. We got to go watch a Swans game, and just the fact to see the crowd full was my first live sport event where I guess people got paid to play sport, just blew my mind. And to be there with all the boys and just love it. I remember thinking at the time, I'm going to be the first female to ever play for the men's team. And I remember telling my dad that, and he never told me I couldn't do that. Like, it was just like, go for it. Like, let's make it work. And so that was where I guess my love for footy came in. And I guess like a lot of the Melbourne girls, which I didn't realise there was leagues down in Melbourne where girls got to play. I had to stop playing at 15 when the boys got to 16. It was just a non-thing you couldn't do. But it wasn't that challenging for me not to do because that's when my netball career picked up. A lot of people like that make netball, and the girls I'm playing with now at the Australian level have had pretty cruisy careers. They've made all the junior state sides. They played for the Australian 21s, then make it into the SSN, which is the equivalent to the AFL for us. And for me, mine was completely opposite. I remember trying out for my first ever netball team, which was our local side, and it was the representative team. And I get to the trials and there was 4 other athletes, so I was the 5th. So all of us were an automatic in, which was great. Got to call up a few of my friends. And yeah, from that, got 12 friends in, and we got to play state from 12 years old all the way to 15. So for me, sport was just fun. The fact that I was playing representative netball, I made tryouts just because I rocked up on the day. I thought, this is a pretty cruisy life. And then I tried out for the schoolgirl stateside, which I actually didn't know was a thing at the time, but I found out a few of my friends were trying out. So my dad just drove me into the city one day, classic country people not knowing you had to register for the event. They tried to turn us away when we got there because we didn't register, and my dad pleaded, like, we've driven 3 hours to get here. Please just let my daughter try. I'll just give her 2 games, like that's it. I pretty much, once I got my 2 games in, I think I played every single game from that point on. And I was lucky enough to actually make the stateside, which blew both my dad and I away because at that time I wasn't even able to make my school side because we had such amazing athletes. And then from there, I was lucky enough to get picked up from the Australian Institute of Sport when I was in year 11. And for people that don't know, that the Australian Institute of Sport is in Canberra. So moving away from your family at the age of 17 is pretty confronting. And I've gone from training, I guess, twice a week to then training every day. If not once a day, it's twice a day. So the shock on my body and the shock of me thinking, okay, is this what it's like to be an athlete, just blew my mind away. But the fact that in my mind I could have a career out of sport was just, mind-blowing. And I learned a lot from there. And I think, when I moved down to the AIS, it was a big part of my life and something I'll always be grateful for because I guess a year or 2 before then, it's when I questioned if I was gay or not. And for me, coming through a small country town, not knowing anyone else that's gay, being from a Catholic Italian family, I didn't want to disappoint my family. And I just felt like I had no one to talk to. And I'm sure that's a lot like the same story for a lot of gay people. But I just didn't, for me, being gay was so wrong and I didn't want to be that. So I, what you normally do, just go try and find boyfriends and all that. And I just felt like I didn't fit into the world and like nothing ever really made sense. But for me, sport was my safe spot. So whenever I got to go and play netball, when I was on that court for that hour, I could be me for a whole hour and be judged on who I am, my ability playing sport, and that was it. So there was no question, oh, this person's gay or is she like this? And, probably no one thought that, but as a kid, that's just what was in my head. I was so scared to be the real person I was. But in sport, it definitely became my safe spot. So moving to that AIS, and moving away from my family, it was where I got to go, okay, this is a fresh start, no more lies, who am I? And I really got to discover who I was. And yes, sport was my safe spot, but once I actually got to finally, I guess, release that, and my netball team were the first people I got to tell, and same like what Rana was saying, where sport, it's so accepting and it's probably the only place where you can really be 100% yourself and people accept you for who you are. Like, that's what it was. I was so scared. And I think once my parents found out, they were more scared that I wouldn't be picked for Australian sides because of my sexuality than anything else. So they were nervous because netball is such a straight sport that coming out as the first gay athlete in netball, how would people see me? And lucky enough, my team was so accepting. My coach was amazing and no one ever questioned it. And still to this day, everyone's been so amazing. Even fans, supporters, once my wife and I got married, they were just, it was brilliant in WA, which is hilarious. We're on the front page and the back page of the paper of our wedding photos. But the fact that I guess in the last 15 years that the world's it's now accepting a lot of gay athletes and people, it's just been really nice for me and my family. But the fact that I can be open with my family, I can play the sports I love and people just love you for who you are, I think it's just amazing. And for me, being at the Australian Institute of Sport at such a young age and being able to be who I am today, I hold a lot of love for the Australian Institute of Sport. And from there, with sport, so footy was just off to the side. And then I was lucky enough to get picked up in my hometown at the New South Wales Swifts, where, you go from playing every single game, you think you're the big shot because, you've played every game, you're getting MVPs, and then you go into the big league. And for 2 years, I sat on the bench and I had to, again, find who I was, accept that, this is the role I am as a teammate. I'm still young. I'm playing with the likes of Catherine Cox, Kim Green, all Australian players. And I had to really, teach myself. And one thing my dad taught me was when you're at training, it's not about, just trying to get on court and all this. It's about trying to make me the best player I am. But the better I get, the better my teammates are going to be. So every single training, I had to come up against Kim Green, and I knew I would not touch the court unless I beat her at training. So, which is hard as an athlete, because I'm thinking, well, if the better I get, the better she gets. I didn't want that to happen. But to this day, she has taught me everything I know. I'm quite glad she's retired, so I don't have to play her again. But yeah, it was challenging, and I got then from there. I think I played 2 games. My debut was in a final. We were down by 20, and at halftime, my coach told me to get the ball. So I played like a 18-year-old does and just flew at everything. It was like a kamikaze kid. But from there, I was lucky enough that the Australian coach was watching the game, and she picked me up as a squad member, and I got to then move to Western Australia with her and play for the West Coast Fever. And that was amazing. I was in WA for 6 years. One, met my wife over there, so that's a massive tick. But 2, I got to captain the club. I got to learn a different position. And I was the first captain to ever get our team to the final. So that, for me, that was massive. I loved the club so much, and I thought I'd see the rest of my career out there and live over in Western Australia for the rest of my life. And it wasn't until a few years in a row, I wasn't making the Australian side, and whenever we lost, I blamed myself for everything. I was really hard on myself, and it just became too much. Everything was, just seemed like it was just getting too much for me. And the Collingwood Football Club and Melbourne Storm brought 2 teams into our league, and so they were starting from scratch. Melbourne was closer to home. The Australian coach at that time made it pretty clear to me that I wouldn't be making the Diamond side again if I stayed at Fever. So for me, it was going to a new club, challenging myself. I had the same coach for 6 years. Would a new coach bring anything different to my game? And I questioned Collingwood because at the time they were signing all these big name players, and one, I was excited to play with them. So that excited me because I learn off players around me more than I do the coaches. So that I was like, okay, this could really work. But at the same time, I was like, how can the coach control so many big personalities? It turns out we didn't do very well, which everyone expected us to win. But I learned so much in those 2 years because, one, trying to bring a whole, all these amazing athletes and creating a team, it taught me that it doesn't matter. You don't need superstars to win a competition, which I always thought, you just need 10 LeBron James and you're going to win everything. Where that doesn't quite work in netball. Netball's all about smarts and teamwork and how to play together. And so I was lucky enough to still love the game so much, even though that we weren't doing really well. I got runner-up MVP that year, so everything was still going pretty well. I was expected to make the Australian team that year. There was a lot of talk around me, which at that time I got really nervous about. And then I didn't make it. So once I didn't make it, I was probably in a bit of shock. But then that kind of quickly moved away because then football became an opportunity. And so I asked the question with the club, well, if I don't make the Diamonds, can I play footy? And they always said yes. So the time I didn't make the Diamonds, I was on the phone call straight away to my coach and to the CEO. And we tried to make it work, and we did. So I've been lucky enough for the last 3 years to be a dual code athlete, to play at the top of the level for netball and AFLW. So I've been extremely thankful. Footy, however, did put a little bit of a damper on the diamond. So Netball Australia aren't a fan that I do play footy. A lot of people call me like a trailblazer, which I never really understood up until, I guess, playing the both codes, and just like you think it's fun to be a trailblazer. It's not, because you're always trying to knock down doors and it's always harder for you, but you got to remember that it's going to be easier for the people behind you. And I didn't really get that until this year, because I've seen so many other netballers come across to footy and not just have to give one up but play both codes. And then we now have a player who is playing with the Melbourne football team and is a part of the Victorian Institute of Sport for netball. So to see athletes now doing both, and she's at the start of the career, blows my mind, because I always thought I'm towards the end of my netball career, so I can do footy. But now to be able to see these young kids being able to play two codes and make it a career, I think is unbelievable, and I can't wait to see what the future netballers, how they turn into footballers, because I believe netballers make the best footballers. So fingers crossed they do well. But it's exciting to watch and exciting to see, I guess, where the game goes. And that's the big question for me at the moment is I'm now recovering from an ACL injury. Netball doesn't want me to play footy. Footy doesn't want me to play netball. And I've got pretty big decisions to make, because it's Commonwealth Games in a couple of years. And is that in my mind, or do we go down the football path? So, fingers crossed. I might just keep playing both, but let's wait and see. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ash, and best of luck. Obviously, big decisions for you coming up. As an opponent, I'd hope you choose netball, but as an AFL supporter, as an AFLW supporter, I'd love you to keep going with your footy, because I love watching you play, and I think you've brought so much to our sport. So thank you. And I found it so interesting when you were saying that sport was your safe place. I think, the more conversations like this that we have, and the more actions that we put in to promote acceptance into sport, we're going to make sure that, sport is going to be everyone's safe place. And I think that's our ultimate goal. So thanks again for sharing your story with us. Thank you everyone so much for joining in this morning and sharing your time and your knowledge, our speakers. And I hope everyone's been able to take away something from the session today. I think it's fair enough to say that we've all been armed with some really key information, and that we can put into practice in our community setting in the days, weeks or months to come. So just for your knowledge, Council have adopted a 2025 strategy that we'll send out to you as a part of the follow-up for today's event. It's called the Women's Participation in Sport and Recreation in Melbourne's West Action Plan for Change 2020 to 2025. This provides a platform of actions to address equality issues for women in community sports. And also, it has been mentioned a couple of times throughout today's event, but we've got some LN podcast episodes that fit in really well with our discussion. So please feel free to jump on the Leisure Network's website, your chosen podcast app. Otherwise, I think the links are in our chat function as well, and be sure to give those a listen. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful day ahead. It looks nice and sunny out there, so get some fresh air and have a wonderful day. Thanks again.